Ilhan Omar was criticizing America's Middle East policy, claiming this country is just as guilty as others, and she smiled as if she had revealed some profound truth. But what Omar didn't know was that Lauren Boebert was sitting in the back of the chamber, listening to every word. Boebert slowly stood up, and the question she asked would corner not just Omar, but the entire liberal establishment. Ilhan, if you don't love this country, why are you even here? The change in Omar's expression. But what happened next would expose the truth about anti-American sentiment in Congress and change everything. It was a typical Wednesday afternoon in the House chamber. But what was about to unfold would become one of the most viral confrontations in congressional history. The session was focused on foreign policy, specifically America's role in international conflicts, and the atmosphere was tense with the usual partisan divisions that had come to define modern politics. The chamber was filled with the usual mix of representatives, staff members, and observers, all going through the motions of what they assumed would be another routine policy debate. The mahogany benches stretched across the historic room, filled with lawmakers scrolling through their phones or shuffling through papers, most paying only half attention to the proceedings. Ilhan Omar had taken the floor, her black hijab framing her face, as she spoke with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for her inflammatory rhetoric. She stood at the podium, her voice carrying across the chamber with that familiar tone of moral superiority that had made her both a hero to the far left and a lightning rod for controversy since her arrival in Congress. Mr. Speaker, she began, her accent still carrying traces of her Somali origins, we need to have an honest conversation about America's role in international conflicts. For too long, we have pretended that our foreign policy is somehow morally superior to that of other nations. We have convinced ourselves that American exceptionalism justifies actions that we would condemn if taken by any other country. The chamber remained largely quiet, though a few Republican members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was familiar territory for Omar, who had built her political brand on criticizing American foreign policy and questioning the very foundations of American leadership in the world. The truth is, Omar continued, her voice growing more animated, when we look at civilian casualties in Iraq, when we examine the consequences of our interventions in Afghanistan, when we consider the broader impact of American military action across the Middle East, we must acknowledge that this country is just as guilty as others when it comes to causing suffering and instability. She paused for effect, looking around the chamber with what she clearly believed was righteous indignation. We cannot continue to hold other nations accountable for their actions while exempting ourselves from the same moral standards. American bombs kill civilians just as surely as bombs from any other nation. American policies create refugees just as certainly as the policies of countries we condemn. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Omar seemed pleased with herself, as if she had just delivered some profound truth that her colleagues were too cowardly to acknowledge. She had made similar statements before, but never quite so directly, never with such explicit condemnation of the country that had given her refuge and opportunity. What Omar didn't realize was that Lauren Boebert was sitting in the back of the chamber, her jaw tightening with each word. Boebert had been listening intently, her hands clenched in her lap, her face a mask of barely controlled anger. This wasn't just policy disagreement for her. This was personal. This was about the very soul of the country she loved. Boebert had been thinking about Omar's history, about the pattern of statements that had consistently placed her at odds with American values and interests. She remembered Omar's infamous description of the September 11th attacks as some people did something, reducing the worst terrorist attack in American history to a casual afterthought. She remembered Omar's anti-Semitic comments about Jewish influence in American politics, her support for the BDS movement against Israel, and her consistent alignment with America's enemies. As Omar continued her speech, Boebert felt something snap inside her. This wasn't just another policy debate. This was about loyalty, about gratitude, about what it meant to be an American. Here was someone who had been given refuge by America, who had been welcomed into the highest levels of government, who had been handed opportunities that millions of people around the world could only dream of, And she was using that platform to attack the very country that had made her success possible. We must stop pretending that American exceptionalism is anything more than a convenient myth, Omar continued, her voice growing stronger. We must acknowledge that our foreign policy has contributed to instability, to suffering, to the very problems we claim to be solving. Until we can look in the mirror and see ourselves as we truly are, we will never be able to build a more just and peaceful world. That was the moment when Boebert's patience finally ran out. She stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor, the sound echoing through the chamber. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. The energy in the room shifted as everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen. "Mr. Speaker," Boebert said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "I request permission to respond to the gentlewoman from Minnesota." The speaker looked surprised but nodded his consent. "The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized." Boebert walked down the aisle, her boots clicking against the floor with purpose. She wasn't rushing, but there was an intensity to her movement that made everyone in the chamber pay attention. When she reached the front of the chamber, she turned to face Omar directly, her eyes blazing with conviction. "Ilhan," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber with unmistakable authority, "I've been sitting here listening to you blame America for the problems of the world, and I have just one question for you." The chamber was completely silent now. You could hear the air conditioning humming, the distant sound of traffic outside, the rustle of papers as members leaned forward to hear what was coming next. If you hate this country so much, if you think America is just as guilty as our enemies, if you believe that the nation that gave you refuge and opportunity and a platform to speak freely is somehow fundamentally evil, then I have to ask you directly, why are you even here? The question hit the chamber like a thunderbolt. Omar's face went pale, her confident expression faltering for the first time. Several Democratic members looked shocked, while Republicans began to sit up straighter, sensing that something significant was unfolding. But Boebert was just getting started. "You came to this country as a refugee, Ilhan. America opened its doors to you when you had nowhere else to go. America gave you safety, opportunity, education, and ultimately a seat in the highest legislative body in the land. And this is how you repay that generosity? By comparing America to terrorist organizations? By suggesting that we're no better than the regimes that create the very refugees you once were." Omar tried to interrupt, but Boebert held up her hand. "No, Ilhan, you've had your time to speak. Now it's my turn to respond to your attack on the country that made your success possible." The authority in Boebert's voice was undeniable. This wasn't just political theater anymore. This was a fundamental confrontation between two completely different visions of America and what it meant to be an American. "Let me remind you and everyone in this chamber about some of the things you said about America," Boebert continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You described the September 11th attacks, the worst terrorist attack in American history, as some people did something. Some people did something, Ilhan? Nearly 3,000 Americans died that day. Firefighters, police officers, office workers, flight attendants, mothers, fathers, children. They weren't just some people. They were Americans, and they were murdered by terrorists who hated everything this country represents." The chamber was dead silent now. Omar sat rigid in her seat, her face a mask of barely controlled anger, but she seemed unable to formulate a response to the devastating accuracy of Boebert's accusations. "You've made anti-Semitic comments about Jewish influence in American politics," Boebert continued, her voice carrying the weight of righteous indignation. "You've suggested that American support for Israel is bought and paid for, reducing the complexities of Middle East policy to crude stereotypes about Jewish money and power. You've supported the BDS movement, which seeks to economically strangle the only democracy in the Middle East." She began pacing now, her energy filling the chamber. "You've consistently sided with America's enemies over America's allies. You've criticized American military action while remaining silent about the atrocities committed by dictatorships and terrorist organizations. You've used your platform to attack American foreign policy while offering nothing but praise for regimes that oppress women, execute homosexuals, and deny basic human rights to their own people. The indictment was devastating, and everyone in the chamber knew it. Omar's pattern of statements wasn't just policy disagreement. It was a consistent pattern of hostility toward the country that had given her everything. But what really bothers me, Ilhan, Boebert said, her voice becoming more personal, is the ingratitude. The complete lack of appreciation for what America has given you. Do you remember what your life was like before you came here? Do you remember the refugee camps, the poverty, the lack of opportunity? Do you remember what it was like to live in a country where women like you and me would have no voice, no rights, no chance to achieve anything? She stopped directly in front of Omar, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. America gave you everything you have. The education that allowed you to understand politics. The freedom that allowed you to speak without fear. The opportunity that allowed you to build a career and a platform. The democracy that allowed you to be elected to this chamber. And this is how you repay that gift? By attacking the very foundations of American society. Omar finally found her voice, but it was shaky and defensive. I have every right to criticize policies that I believe are harmful, she said. Dissent is patriotic. Questioning government actions is part of democratic discourse. I won't be silenced by dash. Dissent is patriotic, Boebert interrupted, her voice cutting through Omar's words like a knife. But what you're doing isn't dissent. It's hostility. It's not criticism of specific policies. It's condemnation of America itself. It's not the voice of someone who wants to improve the country. It's the voice of someone who fundamentally rejects what America stands for. The distinction was crucial, and everyone in the chamber understood it. There is a difference between criticizing specific policies and attacking the moral foundation of the nation itself. Let me tell you what real patriotism looks like, Ilhan, Boebert continued, her voice growing more passionate. Real patriotism is loving your country enough to fight for its values, even when it's difficult. Real patriotism is defending America's interests, even when it's unpopular. Real patriotism is standing with America's allies, even when it comes at a political cost. She gestured toward the American flag that hung behind the speaker's podium. Real patriotism is understanding that America, for all its flaws, is still the greatest force for freedom and opportunity in the world. Real patriotism is recognizing that the American dream isn't just a slogan, but a reality that has transformed the lives of millions of people, including your own. The chamber was completely captivated now. This wasn't just a political argument anymore. This was a fundamental statement about the nature of American identity and what it meant to be grateful for the opportunities that America provided. You talk about American exceptionalism like it's a myth, Boebert continued, her voice rising with conviction. But let me tell you why American exceptionalism is real. It's real because this is the country that defeated fascism and communism. It's real because this is the country that has welcomed more refugees, provided more aid, and defended more democracies than any other nation in history. It's real because this is the country where a refugee from Somalia can become a member of Congress. She paused, letting the words sink in. That's not a myth, Ilhan. That's your life story. That's the proof of American exceptionalism sitting right here in this chamber. The power of the argument was undeniable. Here was Omar, a living example of American opportunity, using her platform to attack the very system that had made her success possible. But you don't just criticize America, Boebert continued, her voice becoming more pointed. You consistently align yourself with America's enemies. You've defended Iran, a regime that chants death to America and sponsors terrorism around the world. You've criticized American sanctions on countries that violate human rights while remaining silent about the violations themselves. You've opposed American military action against terrorists while offering nothing but excuses for the regimes that harbor them. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with other members. This isn't just about foreign policy anymore. This is about loyalty. This is about whose side you're on when America faces its enemies. And time after time, Ilhan, you've chosen the wrong side. Omar tried to respond, her voice rising with anger. I refuse to be lectured about patriotism by someone who dash. Someone who what? Boebert interrupted, her voice cutting through Omar's words. Someone who loves America? Someone who's proud to be an American? Someone who doesn't need to qualify their support for this country with a list of grievances and accusations. The confrontation was reaching a crescendo, and the entire chamber was hanging on every word. You want to lecture me about patriotism? Let me tell you what I see when I look at America. I see a nation that has liberated more people than any other in history. I see a nation that has provided more opportunity, more freedom, more hope to more people than any other civilization that has ever existed. I see a nation that, despite its flaws, remains the last best hope for freedom in the world. She turned back to Omar, her voice becoming more intense. When I look at America, I see the country that my ancestors helped build. I see the country that my father defended in the military. I see the country that gave me the opportunity to start a business, to raise a family, to pursue my dreams without fear of persecution or oppression. Her voice softened slightly, but the power remained. When you look at America, what do you see? Because from your statements, it seems like you see nothing but problems, nothing but guilt, nothing but reasons to apologize for American power and influence in the world. The question hung in the air, and Omar seemed unable to provide a satisfactory answer. How could she explain her constant criticism of the country that had given her everything she had achieved? I'll tell you what I think you see, Boebert continued, her voice growing stronger again. I think you see America through the lens of the ideology that brought you here. I think you see America as the great Satan, the source of all the world's problems, the enemy of justice and peace. I think you've never stopped seeing America as the enemy, even after it welcomed you with open arms. The accusation was devastating, and everyone in the chamber knew it was hitting close to the truth. Omar's pattern of statements wasn't just policy disagreement. It was ideological hostility to the American system itself. But here's what you don't understand, Ilhan, Boebert said, her voice taking on an almost educational tone. America isn't perfect. No country is. But America is exceptional, not because we're perfect, but because we're always striving to be better. We're exceptional because we have the courage to confront our mistakes and correct them. We're exceptional because we've built a system that allows people like you to rise to the highest levels of government, regardless of their background or their origins. She gestured around the chamber. This room has been filled with the sons and daughters of immigrants, people who came here with nothing and built something meaningful. The difference is that most of them understood that America was giving them an opportunity, not a platform to attack the very system that made their success possible. The contrast was stark and undeniable. America had always been a nation of immigrants, but most of them had come with gratitude and a desire to contribute to American society, not to fundamentally transform it according to foreign ideologies. You talk about civilian casualties and American military action, Boebert continued, her voice becoming more pointed. But you never talk about the civilians saved by American intervention. You never mention the women liberated from Taliban oppression in Afghanistan. You never acknowledge the millions of people freed from Saddam Hussein's dictatorship in Iraq. You never recognize the role of American power in preventing genocide, stopping ethnic cleansing, and defending democracies around the world. She began pacing again, her energy filling the chamber. You see only the costs of American action, never the benefits. You see only the mistakes, never the successes. You see only the problems, never the solutions. That's not analysis, Ilhan. That's bias. That's the perspective of someone who fundamentally opposes American power and influence in the world. The chamber was completely silent now, everyone absorbed in the confrontation. This wasn't just about foreign policy anymore. This was about the fundamental question of American identity and what it meant to be loyal to the country that had given you everything. Let me ask you directly, Ilhan, Boebert said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. When America's enemies attack us, whose side are you on? When terrorists target American citizens, Do you stand with America, or do you look for ways to justify their actions? When foreign dictatorships threaten American interests, do you defend America, or do you criticize American responses? The questions were direct and devastating, and Omar seemed unable to provide clear answers. Her pattern of statements had consistently placed her on the wrong side of these fundamental questions of loyalty and patriotism. Because from where I sit, Boebert continued, it looks like you're always on the wrong side. It looks like you're always ready to defend America's enemies and attack America's actions. It looks like you're more concerned with the feelings of foreign dictators than with the security of American citizens. She stopped directly in front of Omar again, her voice becoming more personal. I represent Americans who work hard, who love their country, who want their government to defend their interests and their values. Americans who understand that this country, despite its flaws, is still the greatest force for freedom and opportunity in the world. Her voice grew stronger. You represent an ideology that sees America as the problem, not the solution. You represent a worldview that blames America for everything that's wrong in the world while ignoring everything that's right. You represent a perspective that would rather see America weakened than strengthened, rather see America apologizing than leading. The distinction was crucial, and everyone in the chamber understood it. This wasn't just about policy differences anymore. This was about fundamental loyalty to the American system and American values. But here's what really bothers me about your approach, Boebert said, her voice taking on a tone of genuine concern. You're not just hurting America with your rhetoric. You're hurting the very communities you claim to represent. You're making it harder for Muslim Americans to be accepted as patriots. You're making it harder for immigrant communities to be seen as loyal Americans. You're reinforcing stereotypes about divided loyalties and foreign influence. The point was particularly powerful because it highlighted the broader consequences of Omar's rhetoric. Her actions weren't just affecting her own reputation. They were affecting the perception of entire communities of Americans who deserved better representation. Muslim Americans serve in our military, Boebert continued, her voice growing more passionate. They defend this country with their lives. They contribute to American society in countless ways. They deserve representatives who will defend America's interests, not attack them. They deserve advocates who will show the world that being Muslim and being American are not contradictory, that you can maintain your faith while loving your country. She looked directly at Omar. But you're not showing them that path. You're showing them that being American means constantly criticizing America, constantly apologizing for American power, constantly siding with America's enemies. That's not the message that Muslim Americans need to hear, and it's not the message that America needs to hear about Muslim Americans. The chamber was completely captivated now. This wasn't just a political argument anymore. This was a fundamental statement about the nature of American identity and what it meant to be a loyal citizen regardless of your background or your faith. You want to know what real representation looks like? Boebert asked, her voice rising with conviction. Real representation means fighting for your constituents' interests, not using your platform to attack the country that gave you the opportunity to serve. Real representation means defending America's values, not constantly finding fault with American actions. Real representation means showing the world that America is a country where anyone can succeed, not a country that should be ashamed of its history and its power. She began moving around the chamber again, her energy commanding everyone's attention. I came here to fight for the people of Colorado, to defend American values, to support policies that make America stronger and more prosperous. I came here to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I came here to build up America, not tear it down. The contrast with Omar's approach was stark and undeniable. Where Omar consistently criticized and attacked, Boebert consistently defended and supported. Where Omar saw problems, Boebert saw opportunities. Where Omar expressed hostility, Boebert expressed love. But you seem to have come here with a different agenda, Boebert continued, her voice becoming more pointed. You seem to have come here to use your platform to attack the very system that made your success possible. You seem to have come here to advance an ideology that sees America as the enemy, not the solution." She stopped in front of Omar again, her voice taking on a tone of genuine sadness. "And that's not just wrong, Ilhan. It's tragic. It's a waste of the opportunity that America has given you. It's a betrayal of the trust that your constituents placed in you when they sent you here to represent their interests." The emotional weight of the moment was palpable. This wasn't just about political disagreement anymore. This was about gratitude, about loyalty, about what it meant to be worthy of the opportunities that America provided. "So I'll ask you one more time," Boebert said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. "If you can't find it in your heart to love the country that gave you everything you have, if you can't bring yourself to defend the nation that welcomed you with open arms, if you can't support the system that made your success possible, then why are you here? Why are you taking up a seat that could be filled by someone who actually wants to serve America rather than attack it?" The question hung in the air like a final judgment, and Omar seemed completely unable to provide a satisfactory answer. How could she explain her constant criticism of the country that had made her success possible? How could she justify her consistent alignment with America's enemies? How could she defend her pattern of statements that placed her at odds with the very foundation of American society? The chamber remained silent for a long moment, the weight of the confrontation settling over everyone present. Several members were nodding slightly, others staring at the floor, processing what they had just witnessed. Omar sat rigid in her seat, her face a mask of barely controlled anger and humiliation. Finally, the speaker cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "The gentlewoman from Colorado has concluded her remarks." The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Minnesota for a response. Omar stood slowly, her composure clearly shaken. When she spoke, her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "I will not be lectured about patriotism by someone who doesn't understand the difference between blind loyalty and constructive criticism. I will not be silenced by attacks on my background or my faith. I will continue to speak truth to power, regardless of the political consequences." But her words felt hollow, defensive, lacking the moral authority that had characterized Boebert's response. She had been fundamentally challenged on the most basic questions of loyalty and gratitude, and she had no adequate response. "The American people deserve representatives who will hold their government accountable," Omar continued, her voice growing stronger but still lacking conviction. "They deserve leaders who will question policies that cause harm, who will challenge actions that contradict our values, who will demand better from their elected officials. But they also deserve representatives who love this country," Boebert called out from her seat, her voice cutting through Omar's words. "They deserve leaders who understand that America, despite its flaws, is still worth defending. They deserve advocates who will fight for American interests, not against them." The exchange was over, but the impact would resonate far beyond that chamber. The confrontation between Lauren Boebert and Ilhan Omar had exposed fundamental questions about American identity, about loyalty, about what it meant to be grateful for the opportunities that America provided. As the session continued, members on both sides of the aisle were left to contemplate the deeper implications of what they had witnessed. This wasn't just about foreign policy or political rhetoric. This was about the soul of American democracy and who deserved to have a voice in shaping its future. The confrontation had revealed the stark difference between those who saw America as a force for good in the world and those who saw it as a source of global problems. It had highlighted the distinction between constructive criticism and destructive hostility. Most importantly, it had demonstrated the power of authentic patriotism in the face of ideological opposition. Lauren Boebert had not just defended American foreign policy. She had defended the very idea of America itself, the concept of American exceptionalism, and the principle that those who benefit from American opportunity should be grateful for it rather than hostile to it. In doing so, she had given voice to millions of Americans who were tired of seeing their country constantly criticized by those who had benefited most from its generosity. The age of unchallenged anti-American rhetoric in Congress was over. The age of holding representatives accountable for their loyalty to the country that had given them everything had begun. And it had started with a restaurant owner from Colorado who had the courage to ask a simple question. If you don't love America, why are you here?